Hello, my name is Panos Scribanos, and I want to first thank the organizers of this workshop for inviting me to speak today. I've worked for Tsleil-Waututh Nation for almost 9 years, most of those as their JS coordinator, and what I want to do is share with you some of the initiatives Tsleil-Waututh is involved with regards to mobilizing its information in order to help put its face back onto its territory. This is my presentation outline. First, I'm going to explain what information mobilization means and why it's important for First Nations. Then I'll go over some common roadblocks that hinder effective information management. And then finally, I'll share with you some of the initiatives we're working on at Tsleil-Waututh and how these are helping to mobilize their information and allowing them to conduct more effective analysis, planning, and monitoring. So what does information mobilization mean? To me, information mobilization means making information, any type of information, accessible so that it can contribute strategically to an organization's goals. This means for the most part making information digital. Examples of information include historic publications, old maps and charts, court case materials, research papers, government and industry reports, audio and video recordings, use and occupancy surveys, and even books. Information mobilization is really important. It helps reduce operating costs, improve efficiency and productivity, safeguards vital information, and helps support better decision making. So what issues most prevent First Nations from having effective information mobilization? I think it's lack of funding to pay for staff and infrastructure, a lack of capacity at both the technical and management levels, and I think it's also a lack of a plan in many cases to get efforts started and to keep them going long term. I would argue, however, that the biggest issue facing First Nations and preventing them from having effective information mobilization is having a lack of accessible information. What do I mean by this? We're surrounded by information. Our offices are full of paper, books, old maps, boxes, and even on the digital side, many organizations struggle with maintaining the amount of information that's stored on their servers and hard drives. But most of this information isn't accessible. It hasn't been mobilized. There's also a lot of information that's under the custody of other organizations. For example, information located within museums, libraries, and archives. Nations either may be unaware of this information or unable to access it for a variety of reasons. And the inability to mobilize this kind of information prevents it from being used to analyze impacts to rights and title, understand the history of an area, or make the connections between different types of information that are crucial for good decision making. So this brings me to Tsleil-Waututh and their story and how they're well on their way towards mobilizing large parts of their information. So for those who don't know, Tsleil-Waututh are the people of the inlet. They're a Coast Salish nation located in Vancouver along the shores of Burrard Inlet. In the recent past, Tsleil-Waututh faced many of these issues that I've just mentioned and struggled with an overall lack of information mobilization. Now, they haven't been able to address all of their information issues completely, but they're making good progress now. It's a continuous journey, it takes time, but they're now seeing some positive results after years of effort. So I'm now going to talk about a few of these initiatives that are making information mobilization for Tsleil-Waututh possible. So the first initiative is Tsleil-Waututh's Traditional Place Names Database Project. As many of you are aware, place names are extremely important to the identity of a people, and today there's a growing trend among First Nations to identify their communities in their own language. Recognizing this, we started a project at Tsleil-Waututh to build a traditional place names database. Information from this project was gathered from many sources, including maps, books, journals, and also from personal interviews with community members. In total, almost 700 names to date have been added to the database, with each one spatially referenced to either a specific point or a linear feature such as a stream or a section of shoreline, or an area such as a bay or lake. And one of the really unique features of the project is that we didn't just focus on Tsleil-Waututh place names, but we also chose to include all place names from all First Nations. So one place, for example, may have up to half a dozen different names in multiple languages. A second project is our concentrated use analysis project. Many First Nations have use and occupancy data. Tsleil-Waututh, for example, has use and occupancy data collected from 3 separate studies going back a few decades. Use and occupancy data is great for assessing potential impacts from projects on harvest and cultural sites, but due to its sensitivity, it typically isn't shared or can't be shared in its raw format. There are the usual ways to generalize this data, for example, randomizing points, using buffers, categorization, but at Tsleil-Waututh, we were interested in generalizing point values into more of a big picture style visualization, which represents intensity of land use within Tsleil-Waututh's territory. So what ended up happening is we created a series of data sets depicting concentrated use for a number of different categories of use and occupancy, as well as for overall use and occupancy. The image that you see on the screen here is an example of what the results of this analysis look like for a small area of Tsleil-Waututh's territory. The dark red corresponds with the greatest intensity of use. Another project is our document database. We built this database using freely available software that allows a user to conduct a keyword search on any type of document that's been digitized and OCR'd. OCR, for those who don't know, stands for optical character recognition. Thousands of documents can be searched at a single time. This includes everything from interview transcripts from use and occupancy studies and oral history projects. It also includes trial records, research papers, reports, and also records from past treaty negotiations. One recent example had a staff member conduct a search for clams. Not only were all incidents of the word clam or clams brought up, but also all the surrounding text around the word clams, giving the user a lot of context. And then all these search results were compiled into a single document for easy reference. This is a really great research tool. Another initiative that I'm particularly fond of is one where old air photos, going back as far as 1926, when they were first flying airplanes, are located and incorporated into our GIS. To do this, one only needs to scan the air photo and georeference it. There's a lot of different ways to do this depending on the desired level of accuracy, but the process is relatively straightforward and enables you, in a way, to look back in time. So here's an example of a few maps, or a few images, air photo images. This one here is from 2009, and this one here is from 2006. Both are showing the same area. Using this type of imagery, we're able to do things like compare land use change over time. We can do things like compare shoreline change over time, and even do things like identify the locations of historic settlements and activities that no longer are apparent in the present day. Finally, one last project that I'm going to talk about is our historic travel routes and energetics analysis project. We started this project just this past spring, and we did it to examine historic travel times and travel costs within Tsleil-Waututh's territory. This project is divided into 2 parts. First, we conducted a least cost analysis to calculate historic travel times over land and water. The data for this analysis came from digital elevation data and hydrology data. To calculate the travel time over land, we used a function called the Tobler's function, which has been used in numerous cost distance calculations. And then to calculate the travel time over water, we conducted our own canoe trial, where we measured the distance and the time to get to different places within the territory. So here's a table that shows calculated canoe travel times between major Tsleil-Waututh village sites. And then we also created a cost catchment area that are within 2 hours, 8 hours, and 48 hours travel time from Tsleil-Waututh's main communities in order to estimate outermost locations. So the map that you see on the screen here shows some of the results from this analysis. Tsleil-Waututh's main community on Broad Inlet is being used as the starting point, and the red line the red outline there, symbolizes the extent that one could travel to within 2 hours of travel time. The white dotted line that you see symbolizes the furthest extent one could theoretically reach within 8 hours of travel time. And then the bands of color radiating outward from here correspond to greater and greater travel times. So I've just told you about 5 different projects that Tsleil-Waututh is working on that are all helping to mobilize this information. There are a few others that I'll briefly mention, and they're in different stages of development. One of them is an archives project, which began last year, and what it's doing is archiving cultural and environmental knowledge that's been recorded and contained in trial records from past Tsleil-Waututh litigation. This project is now expanding to include other materials within the department. Another project is our Indigitization project, where we recently received funding to digitize and preserve analog tape that contains taped conversations and interviews between community members and elders, many of whom are no longer with us. And then another project, and probably one of my most favorite projects, involves the search for historic maps and charts, some of which are quite rare, like the one that you see on the screen here. And then what we do is we would digitize certain parts of these of the information on these charts and maps, and then add them to our GIS database. So these are some of the initiatives that are helping to mobilize information for Tsleil-Waututh. Efforts continued, but there's still a lot of work to do. One of the things that I most like about my role with the nation is that they've given me the mandate to share this information with other nations. So if anyone is interested in learning more about any of these projects, please send me an email. My email is on the screen here. The nation has also allocated some of my time for assisting other First Nations with their GIS and information management needs. If anyone is interested in learning more about that, please contact me. You can also find me on LinkedIn as well as on the Aboriginal Mapping Network's Facebook page. Thank you very much.